Wait a minute. At the 1,000 mile mark, Harley wants you to check both the torque of your front and rear axle. They also suggest that you should do this annually. The front axle is a much different design than we're used to. Instead of an axle with a nut on the end to torque down, we actually have a threaded axle that threads into the left fork tube. If we take a look at the diagram, you can see the axle is here, and it threads into that left fork tube. So the end of the axle is a 19 millimeter hex. I went on Amazon and I found this device. This gives you several different axle sizes that you can insert and then torque your axle. The only problem I had with it is there's not a lot of material to work with. So as you see, by the end of that axle, there's quite a bit of room before you get to the teeth of the axle. And this is frankly really short. So I did some more searching and I found this one. And you can see we have a lot more material to work with, so we'll get a lot better bite on that axle. Let's take a look. In order to torque this axle, we first have to loosen the pinch screw. If we don't, this will actually not move and it won't torque. This is a Showa front end, so all the nuts and bolts are going to be metric. So in this case, this is a 6 millimeter hex. You want a good sharp bit so you don't strip this. It's torqued 11 to 15 foot-pounds, which is not too much torque, so we should be able to loosen this by hand. And you can see it turns pretty easy. So we'll loosen that a few turns so that the axle is free to turn, and then we can now apply its torque. So with our 19 millimeter and a torque wrench set to 72 foot-pounds, the spec is 70 to 75 foot-pounds. We'll insert our hex bit, and you can see the advantage of all that extra material. We have really good grip on this. And we'll simply torque this until it clicks. So that's 72 foot-pounds. Again, the spec 70 to 75 foot-pounds. The next step is to re-torque that pinch bolt. They instruct you to push in on the fork tube to make sure there's contact with the spacer. And then we're going to torque this 11 to 15 foot-pounds. I have a nice sharp new 6 millimeter hex. So we'll make sure that's fully seated and we'll begin to torque that. Once it starts to grab, I'm going to push in. I'm holding the tire with my foot and I'm going to pull up. The instructions call for you to push inward on that fork tube until it contacts the spacer. There is really no way to push on that and really make any difference on movement. And you can see it's clearly contacting the spacer. So I think pushing with my hand and holding the tire by my foot was making absolutely no difference, but that's what the instructions say. So what would you do if there was space there? How would you hold that with all that force while making that torque? Well, I think you'd either got to go find a really strong friend, or you might try a ratchet strap. So you could run this ratchet strap between the two fork legs and then crank that down to put some pressure inward and then make your torque. I think you could overdo it. So you don't want to go too tight here. If you put too much pressure and get them too close, it may rub. But that should be obvious when you spin the wheel. You would hear that rub and feel it. So just an extra tip here. Until we get our torque. And there we go, 13 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to check the rear axle torque. Harley-Davidson offers a tool to make this easier. This allows you to adjust your axle torque without having to remove the muffler or the saddlebag for that matter. You can slide this up in there, attach your torque wrench to this point, and then apply the torque with the wrench. So I bought this on Amazon. Let's see if it works. You can see with this 4.5-inch muffler, there is no way to get this wrench in there. There's just not enough clearance. But I suspect if we just loosen the muffler clamp, we might be able to wiggle it far enough out to get this on. We'll take a 1/2 inch and remove the two muffler clamp bolts. Don't lose the washer. With a 5/8 deep socket, you'll go underneath and loosen the muffler clamp. Loosen it enough till it wiggles, and then you're going to have to wiggle this muffler off. I've already struggled with it, so it's loose now, so it'll come right off. This is what the muffler clamp looks like. With the muffler removed, you still can't get this tool in there. It's just too thick along the outer edge to clear the shock absorber. So you'd have to take the shock absorber bolt off to get this to fit. But that is as much effort as just removing the muffler. So this tool is a fail. I don't see any value in it. If you found one out there that fits, put it in the comments. It certainly would make this job easier. You're going to remove the E-clip by jamming a screwdriver and twisting to get this off. And then we're going to use a 36mm socket. We're going to torque this 135 to 145 foot-pounds. So that is quite a bit of torque. So you may need to brace yourself to get enough torque on this bolt. Don't forget to put your safety clip back on. They tell you to put this flat side out. It can be pretty difficult to tell which is the flat side. One tip is look for the side that had anti-seize on it. That goes inward. Sometimes you can push these in by hand, but if not, use a pair of pliers with some protective ends on it so you don't mar up your bolt. Couple reminders here. Harley recommends you replace this every time you remove it. I'll leave that up to you. And also, I'm an enthusiast, not a professional. Use my information at your own risk. Next, we need to reinstall our muffler. These can be pretty tricky to get started. There's these little grooves here, these little slots. You can stick a screwdriver in there and give it a little twist to create some space in that connection to make it easier to slide on. Your muffler clamp needs to go on before you slide it on. Make sure you have the bolt facing down where you can get to it. You're going to torque this muffler clamp 38 to 43 foot-pounds. When you reassemble your muffler, make sure you wiggle it all the way on. You can tell by the markings of where it was on your muffler. It should really butt up against where the catalytic and the crossover start. You want the muffler clamp to be at the end, but not all the way to the end, almost to the end, because you want to pinch that muffler securely so there's no air leaks. Make sure also that your bolt is somewhere that you can get to it with your torque wrench as you need to torque this down. But you can play with it so it's not so visible, but still reachable. Keep in mind when you tighten it, it's going to squeeze a little bit so it will move. The other important thing to pay attention to is your E-clip here. So your safety clip. You want to make sure that it clears the muffler. So spin it around and make sure it won't rub. If it looks like it's going to rub, you're going to need to rotate your muffler until there's enough clearance. Once you're happy with the position of your muffler, torque this muffler clamp 38 to 43 foot-pounds. For the muffler hanger, you're going to make sure that these bolts line up flat, and then you're going to torque that with its locking washer at 14 to 18 foot-pounds. Well, there you have it, checking both the front and rear axle nut torque values on a 23 CVO. I will say it's unfortunate this tool did not fit. I think it would save a lot of time. I think you could grind down this outer edge a bit to get it to clear the rear shock absorber, and it might work. But I will say removing the muffler is not that difficult, and using a true socket, I think, gives you the most accurate torque value. This video is intended just to cover the torque of the axle, both front and rear, and not anything else. But at this point, you really should check your belt tension. If your belt is out of adjustment, you're going to need to take that rear axle and loosen it and retighten it a few times while you make your adjustment. So a lot more involvement than just torquing the axle. So I've made a video covering this already that I will link here. In that video, we were working with a brand new belt that was over tight. The specification for belt deflection is now different at the service interval. So I will be offering another video on adjusting the belt tension here shortly, so stay tuned. But until next time, in the friction zone.